Time trap. The city was unsteady, as if it remembered its own collapse and refused to stand straight. Streets twisted in ways that made sense only to memory, and memory itself seemed unreliable, fragmented by the silence left in the wake of the blackout. Broken billboards flickered faint neon messages, phrases looping endlessly like ghosts. Time in this place was fluid. A minute could stretch into hours, or hours could vanish in the blink of an eye. Kyle moved carefully, boots crunching against shattered glass and the occasional rusted metal grate. He had learned to read the rhythm of the city, a subtle pulse embedded in the hum of failing generators, the faint vibrations of distant machinery, and the whispers of air moving through hollowed buildings. Every alley held a memory of someone who had walked before him, a faint echo of a life once lived, now partially lost to entropy. He clutched the small device in his hand, a relic of a pre-blackout era, meant to track temporal dissonances, moments where the past and present overlapped. It buzzed faintly, signaling fluctuations in time, traces of memory that had refused to die. Kyle had become obsessed with following these irregularities, chasing fragments of moments that might unlock understanding, or at least a semblance of continuity in a world untethered from linearity. The first distortion appeared in a courtyard lined with skeletal remains of vehicles. A street lamp flickered, casting shadows that did not match the broken metal around it. For an instant, Kyle saw children playing, a fleeting tableau from another decade, frozen in repetition. Their laughter was silent, but the sight was enough to pull him forward, deeper into the city's shifting heart. He knew these pockets were dangerous. Time here was treacherous, capable of trapping anyone who lingered too long in its inconsistencies. As he moved, fragments of dialogue surfaced from the past, overlaying the present. Voices called out names he didn't recognize, speaking of deals, warnings, betrayals. Kyle realized that the city's collapsed infrastructure had preserved not just physical remnants, but echoes of human intent, layered like sediment. The farther he walked, the heavier the weight of accumulated time became, pressing against his mind with the subtle insistence of inevitability. A collapsed overpass ahead formed a tunnel of twisted steel and concrete. Kyle hesitated at its mouth, noting the shimmer in the air, a temporal distortion forming a faint veil between moments. He stepped carefully, each footfall measured, as the device's pulse quickened. Within the tunnel, he could see multiple versions of himself, or rather, shadows of his own movement layered atop one another. Some repeated his steps, some diverged, moving in ways he had not yet taken. The sensation was dizzying, like standing in a hall of mirrors where each reflection was a potential path. Emerging from the tunnel, he found a street that was both familiar and alien. A market once thrived here, stalls laden with food and trinkets, vendors shouting, laughter and anger colliding in a chaotic symphony. Now it was a ghost, the echoes of past commerce lingering in thin air. Kyle could feel it pressing against him, the memories crowding the present, suggesting actions and events he had never witnessed but somehow recognized. Each step required judgment, as the past bled into the present and threatened to consume the clarity of the moment. He paused near a collapsed statue at the center of the street. Its base bore faint inscriptions, letters half eroded but recognizable to those who remembered the old world. As Kyle touched the cold stone, he felt a tremor of time ripple through him. For a fleeting moment, the city around him shifted, Doors appeared where none existed, windows glimmered with scenes of past inhabitants, and the air carried scents that had long since vanished. It was intoxicating and disorienting, a trap woven by the city itself, a reminder that in this world, time was not linear, and memory was both guide and snare. Kael adjusted his grip on the device. Each temporal fluctuation brought the risk of disorientation, of becoming trapped in an echo that could never resolve into the present. He understood that the city was a living puzzle, its history fractured into pieces, each influencing the other, each capable of altering perception. Survival required more than physical skill. It required judgment, an understanding of the delicate weave of past and present, and the patience to navigate its dangers without succumbing. He pressed onward, moving through narrow streets and abandoned plazas, guided by the faint pulses signaling dissonance. With each step, fragments of memory surfaced, brief images of people huddled in corridors, machines flickering to life, arguments unresolved. Kael cataloged them in his mind, recognizing patterns, noting intersections where one choice or event seemed to influence another, across time and space. The city was teaching him its rules, revealing its secrets only to those willing to follow its fractured logic, to read the layers beneath the visible decay. Night fell fully, and the neon flickers gained strength against the darkness. Shadows stretched unnaturally, merging past and present. Kael moved carefully, aware that in the city of distorted time, a single misstep could strand him in a loop, leaving him to wander endlessly among echoes that were not his own. Yet he could not stop. The allure of understanding, of charting the currents of time in this fractured world, was too strong. The trap of time was real, but so was the possibility of discovery. And Kael had resolved to walk its shifting paths, step by step. Kael pressed deeper into the streets, the city's dissonance growing with every step. Flickering neon signs refracted against puddles of stagnant water, creating reflections that suggested entire avenues where none existed. He could feel the weight of temporal layers pressing against him, the simultaneous presence of moments that were, moments that had been, and moments that might yet be. Each pulse of his device amplified the sensation, highlighting subtle deviations, doors slightly ajar, shadows moving with impossible coordination, fragments of conversations repeating in loops. He entered a narrow alley, one that twisted sharply before opening into a collapsed plaza. Here, the echoes were stronger, more insistent. A woman passed by, or rather, the memory of a woman passed by, her face etched with fear and recognition at the same time. Kael could see her lips move in silent dialogue with someone who no longer existed, gestures frozen yet fluid, as if caught between frames of a film looping endlessly. The pull of the past was magnetic. He felt it tug at his mind, threatening to draw him into a sequence he could not escape. Kael's pulse quickened, and he forced himself to focus. The device was his guide, a fragile bridge connecting him to the present. Without it, he would be lost, swept away by temporal currents that could fold him into a memory or project him into a scene not his own. Yet even with the device, the risk remained. Time here was capricious, layered, and deceptive, capable of hiding dangers beneath the guise of familiarity. A faint metallic sound drew his attention. Rusted machinery, once part of a transport hub, now emitted a low hum as if remembering its purpose. From its shadow emerged a figure, indistinct, moving through the temporal overlay with ease. Kael paused, analyzing the pattern of motion. The figure's steps were slightly out of sync with the city's present rhythm, suggesting either mastery over the distortions or a life caught in repeated cycles. He debated whether to approach, to observe, or to retreat. Action carried risks. Inaction could mean missing an opportunity to understand the anomaly. He edged closer, carefully maintaining the distance. The figure paused, as if sensing Cale's presence, then continued, leaving a trail of subtle temporal residue. Cale followed, noting the faint shimmer that lingered in the air, a marker of displacement in the city's fractured chronology. It was a breadcrumb, a clue, and possibly a trap. He considered the possibility that the anomaly might be an echo of someone long dead, preserved by the city's warped memory. Yet instinct told him that living intent was behind the movement. The pattern was deliberate, aware. The plaza opened into a larger intersection, where multiple streets converged, forming a crossroad that existed simultaneously in several temporal layers. Cale saw fragments of markets, patrols, and gatherings superimposed over one another, moments colliding and folding together. The device pulsed rapidly, signaling heightened temporal instability. He adjusted his course, navigating through the layers, noting paths where past and present align, and avoiding zones where the misalignment was most severe. Each choice felt like walking a tightrope stretched across moments, a delicate balance between progression and entrapment. In the center of the intersection, Cale glimpsed an object partially buried under debris, a clock, its hands frozen, yet casting shadows that moved independently. Time in this city was no longer linear, but the clock seemed to anchor some fraction of it, a point of reference amidst the chaos. He crouched, examining the artifact. Its mechanisms were corroded, yet pulses of energy from it resonated with the device in his hand, amplifying the temporal anomalies in the surrounding streets. This was no ordinary relic. It was a node, a focal point where the city's past and present intertwined most violently. Cale felt the familiar pull of obsession tugging at him. Understanding the clock could illuminate the city's dissonance, reveal patterns hidden beneath layers of collapse. But to interact with it was to risk destabilizing his own sense of reality. He breathed steadily, grounding himself, aware that a single miscalculation could fold him into a repeating sequence from which there was no return. The city, ever indifferent, pressed against him with silent insistence, offering glimpses of clarity intertwined with danger. A gust of wind stirred the alleyways, carrying with it fragments of scents and sounds from the past. Cale inhaled, letting the sensations guide him, mapping the intersections, recording deviations, and predicting shifts. Each step was deliberate, a negotiation with time itself. He had learned to read the city not as a landscape of structures, but a web of temporal echoes, where survival depended on understanding the rhythm of overlapping realities. As he moved, a sudden distortion rippled across the intersection. Past and present flickered violently, merging and separating like waves. Cale's mind spun for a moment, caught between moments that were no longer fixed, yet somehow persistent. The trap of time had tightened its grip, offering both danger and revelation. He pressed on, driven by the fragile hope that understanding the layers would grant him not just survival, but insight into the city's fractured soul. Cale's footsteps echoed against the broken walls of the intersection, each sound folding over itself, overlapping with distant echoes from moments that might have been. The clock's presence amplified the distortions, ripples of events cascading in erratic, unpredictable patterns. He paused, allowing the hum of the temporal anomalies to wash over him. Faces flickered in and out of view, people he did not know, but who seemed intimately connected to the city's pulse. They were shadows of lives, trapped between seconds, lingering long after their owners had vanished. As he moved closer to the clock, Cale felt a pull in his chest, as if his own memories were being stretched thin. The city had a way of reaching inside, tugging at fragments of identity, demanding recognition of what had been lost. He saw visions of his own past, moments of regret, choices made and unmade, faces of people he had abandoned or forgotten. The temporal distortion blurred the line between observation and participation. He realized that the city was not merely a passive landscape of echoes. It was reactive, responding to the presence of those who dared traverse its layers. A sudden flicker revealed another presence, a man, half transparent, moving against the distorted flow of the street. Cale recognized the movement. It mirrored his own hesitation, his own indecision, but the figure was independent, pursuing a different path through the overlapping moments. The realization struck him sharply. The city had more than echoes. It had sentinels of time, fragments of consciousness preserved by the anomalies, guiding or obstructing those who moved within their realm. Cale hesitated. To proceed risked engagement with these sentinels, entities neither fully alive nor dead, their intentions inscrutable. Yet the alternative, retreat, withdrawal, offered no clarity, only the slow erosion of opportunity. The city's traps were not physical, they were psychological, temporal, moral. To navigate them, he would have to make choices that could bind him to an outcome he could neither predict nor undo. He adjusted the device, sending a faint pulse through the local temporal field. The anomalies responded with subtle shifts, a ripple of movement in the surrounding streets. Shadows flickered, faces appeared and disappeared, and the clock's hands trembled, caught between their frozen positions and a rhythm that defied calculation. Cale's pulse matched the irregular beat of the temporal eddies, his mind straining to comprehend patterns that were both real and unreal, moments that existed and yet never existed. In the chaos of shifting time, Cale noticed a narrow passage partially obscured by rubble. Beyond it, the distortions appeared less severe, a corridor where past and present seemed to coexist more gently. But the path was perilous, littered with fragments of machinery, shattered glass, and the residual echoes of lives interrupted. Every step carried risk. The past could overtake him, the present could fracture, and he could become trapped in a loop, unable to distinguish what was happening from what had already happened. He paused at the entrance, weighing the consequences. The device's pulse thrummed against his palm, a reminder that he could influence the flow, yet not fully control it. The moral weight of his decision pressed upon him. To advance through the corridor was to intervene, potentially altering the course of events for countless others whose echoes lingered. Inaction, conversely, risked allowing the temporal distortions to persist unchecked, leaving the city's inhabitants, living and ghostly alike, ensnared in cycles of repetition. Cale's reflection shimmered briefly in the puddles along the alley, multiplied by fragments of memory and light. He saw himself as he had been, as he is, and as he might become, simultaneously observer, participant, and potential casualty of the city's traps. The choice was stark, yet inevitable. Move forward and engage with the distorted currents of time, or remain stationary, preserving his own clarity at the expense of understanding and influence. The city waited, indifferent yet expectant, offering both danger and revelation to those bold enough to navigate its shifting realities. He inhaled deeply, centering himself. The air was thick with layers of sound and scent from the past, metal tang, faint smoke, and the acrid perfume of decayed memories. Each inhalation drew him closer to a decision he could not postpone. Cale stepped forward into the corridor, his movements deliberate, measured, aware that the city's anomalies would test his mind, his perception, and his morality. The path was uncertain, the outcome unknown, yet he embraced the uncertainty as part of the journey. The city's pulse aligned briefly with his own, a fleeting resonance that allowed him to move without being torn apart by temporal echoes. Shadows shifted around him, fragments of conversation and laughter brushing against his consciousness. The trap of time was real, yet navigable for those willing to confront its paradoxes. Cale's steps carried him deeper into the layered streets, each movement an assertion of will against the indifferent, fracturing flow of moments. He vanished into the corridor, leaving behind the intersection where past and present had collided. The city continued to hum, shifting and folding upon itself, but Cale was now inside the rhythm, an active participant navigating a web of moments that could ensnare, reveal, or destroy. The trap of time remained, but so did the possibility of understanding, and perhaps survival. Cale moved carefully through the corridor, aware that each step could ripple across multiple layers of time. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, intertwining with flickers of the past, merchants haggling over faded goods, children chasing each other across cracked pavement, a stray dog sniffing a street corner long since erased. The device in his hand pulsed more urgently, signaling fluctuations stronger than anything he had encountered before. The corridor seemed alive, aware of his presence, pressing against him with quiet insistence. He reached a narrow chamber at the heart of the anomaly, where the temporal currents were thickest. The air shimmered with overlapping moments, voices from decades past echoing and colliding. Cale realized that the chamber was a focal point, a nexus where countless decisions had converged, creating a dense web of cause and effect. Here, the trap of time was most potent. Anyone lingering too long risked being folded into the echoes, trapped indefinitely in sequences that were not entirely real. Cale stepped forward, his reflection fracturing across puddles and broken glass. For a brief instant, he saw himself from multiple timelines. A cautious observer, a reckless intruder, a man paralyzed by indecision. The images overlapped, indistinct yet vivid, each offering a glimpse of what he could become depending on his choices. The weight of possibility pressed down on him. He knew that even small actions could reshape not only his own trajectory, but also the fragile fabric of the city's temporal memory. A sudden surge of distortion flickered through the chamber. Past and present collided violently, leaving him disoriented. Cale struggled to maintain his footing, gripping the device tightly. The temporal currents carried snippets of conversations, warnings, pleas, laughter, and screams, all overlaid in a chaotic symphony. He could sense lives entwined with his own, echoes of people who had long vanished yet persisted through the city's fractures. Each echo seemed to plead for recognition, for guidance, or for release. Cale understood that the trap of time was not merely a hazard, but also a responsibility. He could leave the corridor untouched, preserving his own safety, or intervene, risking entanglement with the echoes to realign moments, release trapped fragments, or expose forgotten truths. He hesitated, feeling the tug of fear and the pull of moral duty, realizing that the city did not allow neutrality. Silence was itself a choice, and inaction could condemn countless fragments of memory to eternal loops. Taking a deep breath, Kale activated the device, sending a controlled pulse through the nexus. The air vibrated with energy, and for an instant the echoes stilled, faces frozen mid-expression, conversations suspended like frozen droplets. He stepped carefully among them, touching fragments of memory with precision, nudging distorted sequences toward resolution, without overwhelming the delicate weave of time. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally, but necessary. The city seemed to respond, subtle shifts aligning layers that had long been misaligned. Minutes passed like hours, or perhaps hours like minutes. Kale could no longer distinguish. The device's pulse gradually steadied, the chamber's turbulence subsiding. Faces flickered one last time, then merged into a coherent flow, as if breathing had returned to a fractured world. He exhaled, feeling the weight of responsibility lift slightly, though he knew the impact of his actions would continue to unfold far beyond his perception. The trap had been navigated, not destroyed, and the city remained a place of shifting time, but a path forward had been carved, however precariously. As Kale emerged from the chamber into the streets, the city appeared both familiar and alien. Flickers of the past still lingered in peripheral vision, but they no longer threatened to engulf him. He understood now that the trap of time was a persistent force, a reminder that the world's memory was alive, imperfect, and demanding of attention. His journey was far from over, but he had asserted agency within its currents, proving that action, even amid uncertainty, could shape the flow of moments. Kale paused on a rooftop overlooking the city, neon reflections trembling across the shattered skyline. Below, streets twisted in fractal patterns. People moved through overlapping layers of reality, unaware of the subtle adjustments he had made. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that each choice carried unforeseen consequences. The trap of time was never fully avoidable. It could only be navigated with awareness, patience, and courage. He took one last look at the city, the echoes of past and present shimmering like a fractured prism. Somewhere within the layers, moments of suffering and joy coexisted, unresolved yet persistent. Kale knew that his role was not to control, but to guide, to move through the currents with deliberate intent, and to accept the uncertainty that came with living in a world untethered from linear time. With that understanding, he stepped forward, leaving the chamber behind. The temporal currents shifted around him, gentle but insistent, carrying the weight of history and the potential of the future. Kale walked on, aware that each step was both consequence and choice, navigating the trap of time with eyes open, heart steady, and mind attuned to the fragile rhythm of a world in flux. The city remained, eternal and fractured, and he moved within it, a solitary figure tracing the delicate lines between memory, reality, and possibility.